I'm Vicki Poulos, and you're listening to Sweet Success.
You've just checked in to Sweet Success. Join me, Katie Cline, for exclusive conversations with hotel executives, hospitality leaders, and industry innovators. Together, we'll uncover the strategies and techniques these masters of hospitality relentlessly refine. Whether you're already in the industry or just starting out, tune in every week to unlock the secret to your sweet success. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Sweet Success. I'm your host, Katie Cline, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Vicki Poulos. Vicki is the Vice President of Luxury and Lifestyle Brands at IHG Hotels and Resorts, where she drives brand management across some of the most iconic names in travel: Regent, Six Senses, Intercontinental, Kimpton, Vignette Collection, and Hotel Indigo. With more than 2 decades of experience, Vicki's leadership roles at Marriott and now IHG have made her a pro at all things brand, from scaling disruptive newcomers to reimagining legacy hospitality brands. Her work has earned her notable accolades, including Adweek's Rising Brand Star, Hospitality Lodging Magazine's 15 Women Making Their Mark, and Boutique Design's Hotelier of the Year. Vicki, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Katie. I'm thrilled to be here.
You actually started your career working at MTV in advertising. What was it that made you make the switch into hospitality?
Okay, first, starting out at MTV was so much fun. It felt like the golden era of the brand, I would say. And
For sure.
as a 20-something-year-old, it was the perfect crash course, I would say, of how powerful brands can just tap into people's life and the culture and all of the things. And honestly, at that age, it was cool to say that you worked for MTV. So I said,
Sure.
why not? So that's how I started there. And, hospitality, though, for me, it's always been in my DNA. I knew that's exactly where I wanted to end up. And truth be told, I got my interview at the Drake Hotel because I had MTV on my resume, but hospitality, it runs through my blood. But yeah, my first role was at the Drake Hotel as a marketing and PR manager.
And speaking of hospitality running through your blood, I know when we had first talked, you mentioned how your Greek lineage really brings to life that hospitality lover in you.
Absolutely. My Greek roots definitely have a very huge influence of how I see hospitality. And so much of that was time with my family in Greece. And it always strikes me till this day of how hospitality wasn't something that you turn on or off. In restaurants, like servers would be so passionate about their craft, or even, being over at a cousin's house and the way that they would welcome guests in, or even at the Platea, which is the square at any little Greek village, you would just see how people would welcome one another. And I think there is this effortless level of generosity and I think pride in making people feel welcome. And that's what I was exposed to. And, that's very much how I think about brands and how I work with brands today.
I think you're completely right. That authenticity shows through in everything, especially hospitality, but in anything. Like, you can tell when someone on the internet or someone in life is just not being genuine with you. And I want to go back to something you said in when you were talking about starting at MTV, that a lot of what attracted you to that role was it was cool to work there at that time. And, we might laugh about that now, but I do think there's something really powerful to just following what attracts you, like something that you're like, ooh, that looks interesting, that looks fun, like almost following that fun. And as you said, that led you to working at the Drake, which now has given you this entire career in this industry.
That's absolutely right. It's what drives you, what, fuels your belly. And you may not know what that is, but it's experiencing that and being inspired by it, and pursuing it. With the Drake Hotel, it was absolutely a crash course to brand building. There were days that, I was begging catering to, set up a charcuterie board or let me borrow some linens for a photo shoot. And there were other days where I was explaining to the general manager the ROI on a PR activation that I was doing. And that was my first dip into there's something really cool about brand management. I think of it almost as a business leader. You're a very much end to end. And so I just went with that and continued my path into it and being able to start on property. That's where the real magic happens, right?
Absolutely. And like your story is so special, but also not unique within our industry. It's something that I say on this podcast all the time, but it still like makes me feel giddy to hear that someone with your role now started on property. I mean, that just gives such inspiration to people. If this is an industry that promotes from within, that people grow from within, but also I imagine your time at the Drake, being on property, working with all the different departments within a hotel, really understanding the inner workings of a property probably plays a huge role in what you do every day now.
Absolutely. Fast forward to today, I get to do that, exactly that, but on a bigger scale. And so, obviously with leading Kimpton and Hotel Indigo on a global scale, but also driving the regionalization, the delivery of our other luxury and lifestyle brands, it's having those moments on property that really help you ensure that your brands never get stale. And that experience with MTV, you have to be moving as fast as culture is evolving. So those type of experiences, I also think fuel how I want to lead brands. Yes, more on a global scale, but not forgetting these are the moments that differentiate our brands.
Yeah. Do you feel like because of your experience, you look at your position much more as a feedback loop as opposed to corporate is dictating what the hotels do and like that's the end? Or is it a bit of let's hear what you're getting on that front line? And like you said, being that pulse of culture and seeing it firsthand, how does that also infiltrate the brand programs that you're coming up with and your team is working on?
Yeah. There's no ivory tower type mentality. By any means. That is a big part because, I always love to think of general managers as obviously entrepreneurs, and you have talked about that on your show as well. But the freedom and the creativity that you need to lean in and lean onto your properties, that's how you get the authentic execution and all of the things that give, these brands a heartbeat and a pulse. Now, with brand management, I think, I do have a responsibility clearly to ensure that DNA is crystal clear and there are the right guardrails and the right type of framing to ensure there is that consistency to drive brand trust. But the spontaneity and, these hotels developing, what does that mean for them? Let's give them a brand homework and them coming up and authoring, okay, what does it mean for my region or my hotel and my location?
Yeah.
That's what consumers are demanding. And I think that's the responsibility of L&L as well, luxury and lifestyle brands.
That's really cool to hear because, it's a phrase that maybe is a bit overused in our industry, but this kind of freedom within a framework, right? But I think that is what the best brands do so well. Like you said, we're going to make it really crystal clear who we are and who we're not. And then we're going to look to our leaders in the field to say, how are you going to make that special for your destination?
Absolutely.
So I want to back up a minute because before you came to IHG, our paths crossed briefly at Marriott. We didn't know each other at the time. We were working on different brands, working on different continents, but we were at the same very large company. Your last role after 11 years with the company was global brand leader for Moxy Hotels. And you were really in charge of the brand's creation. This is a brand that is beloved still to this day. So tell us a bit about that. Like, how did you do that?
So fun. And by the way, it's such a small world, but in hospitality, somehow it always feels so much smaller as well. But yeah, absolutely. I think Moxy and, really creating their brand was probably the most defining chapters for me in my career. And personal tidbit, I think a part of why I also loved it so much and thrived in that role is because I grew up with parents who were entrepreneurs. So even though I took a very corporate path, that type of spirit is in me. And I think Moxy gave me so much of a chance to lean into that. It was building something from scratch. There was no playbook of how to reinvent a category that was, let's say, filled with hotels that just competed on price. So I had so much fun taking kind of these bold chances. And honestly, I was like, okay, what's the worst can happen? And funny, just a quick story. I remember being in the boardroom early days on Moxy and having to present to Mr. Marriott. And, his big question was, do you still have those beanbag rocking chairs in your guest rooms in New York? And, I had to say, yes, yes, Mr. Marriott, we still have them. In fact, there's a lot of guests love taking pictures of those beanbag rocking chairs, and they're on Instagram, and so I always had a little bit of this, it takes guts and just go for it and stand behind how you're building these brands. And that's definitely carried me through to how I lead brands today for IHG. It's absolutely have to find that spark. You have to stand for something. So for Kimpton and for Hotel Indigo, it's very much, we're constantly asking ourselves, is this going to delight our guests? Are we going to make them smile? And most importantly, are they going to stop and say, oh yeah, you're going to find that only at Kimpton?
Absolutely. What did Mr. Marriott say in that meeting? Was he super on board with everything you guys were doing with Moxy, or was he like, I don't know, guys, but I'm going to give you the runway to go for it here?
Yeah, he gave us the runway, and I'll give you another example, even with Kimpton, on that front, where you do, there's always, clearly being a part of a big organization, you're always thinking about risk and risk tolerance. But one quick example, even with Kimpton, is we had this recent partnership with Tiny Zaps, and we wanted to jump on this whole kind of cultural piece that was happening around tattoo tourism. People were getting tattoos just to mark, their trip, if you will. So we partnered with Tiny Zaps, and we were doing pop-ups across Kimpton hotels where people were getting permanent tattoos. They were getting tatted, in our hotels. And IHG was very supportive, like, yes, that makes sense for Kimpton. Clearly, we need to have the right SOPs, and we need to make sure that we're very thoughtful. But the results were incredible. And the stories that we were creating, I mean, these are real life stories we were getting of coworkers in New York at one of our pop-ups were getting matching tattoos. There was another family, I don't remember where, but it was this multi-generational family. So the grandmother, the mother, and the daughter were also getting tatted. And so it felt like an experience that was so Kimpton. And, it was, these individuals will forever remember that physically.
Literally forever. I mean, I'm thinking about how some brands create like a water bottle or a tote bag, and you hope, every time they go to use that tote bag, they're going to think of me and maybe they'll book a trip again. I mean, this is something that's physically on them forever. That's incredible.
That's right. That's right.
Really cool. And also, again, going back to what you said about like what's the worst that can happen and the risk tolerance, it's oftentimes the big brands that are able to take the risks on developing a new brand or trying something new or putting a tattoo station in their hotels for a pop-up because they have the breadth of the portfolio to support if it doesn't work.
Yeah. And we have the resources to be able to support, okay, how are we going to make sure that this is something guests crave and this is going to be a differentiator, but how do we make sure that these brands are set up for success to be able to do it?
Yeah. I mean, Moxy is a brand that is, as I mentioned, still really beloved specifically by its target market. And a guest that I had on the show was Rory Sutherland. He is the vice chairman of Ogilvy. He's a TEDx speaker, best-selling author. He's obsessed with Moxy. He talked about it on his episode with me. I've heard him talk about it in other interviews that he's done. And he just loves the way that brand does certain things super, super well to really hone in the guest and want them to come back, make them want to come back. So can you walk me through tactically, step by step, how do you create a brand?
Yeah. When you think about some of these brands like Kimpton, like Regent, like Six Senses, or, brand building, I would call it, is an art and a science. There's so much of a science and there's an academic side to it for sure. But also the other part of it is, intuition, and you can validate that intuition through science and data. But I'll say this about it is that you have to think about a brand as a living system. And that living system really needs to evolve through culture, through technology, through people. But the most important thing that you can do when you are creating a brand, think about how you're going to anchor it in a truth. And a really easy example, obviously, is Nike. We can take it out of the industry for a second. Clearly, it's Nike, right? Their core truth for that brand is unlocking human potential. Just do it. But when you think about how has that brand over the decades been able to stretch that type of truth, they've done it through very different type of cultural spaces. What's happening, over time? It was about women's empowerment. You think about how they leaned into that. It was the equity in terms of sport. They leaned into that. It was digital fitness. So they really never changed their core truth, but the way that they show up evolves with every generation. So, you want to bring that into hospitality, say the same thing for Kimpton. They do it really well. And one of the things that's a founding truth that I never met, obviously Bill Kimpton, but I know that founding truth where he believes that a hotel should lift your spirits and it should never put you to sleep is absolutely our North Star. And so how we express that has flexed clearly, over times and with different partnerships and what have you. But tactically, the most important part is exactly what I just expressed. You have to start with a clear why. And then from there, every touch point, right? It's the design, it's the services, it's the program should always ladder up to that core. The other big piece where you start to see brands lose their way is when they're designing it for everyone. You have to know who you're designing it for, and you have to get into their mindset. What is motivating that consumer? How are they showing up in the world? What do they crave? And so want to be very thoughtful across all of the brands that I support is that we can't chase everyone. Can't do it because you end up resonating with absolutely no one.
Yeah, that is the death knell. I just am blown away by what you just said. And I really loved what you're talking about with evolution too, and it being a living system. I was looking at an old brand deck from W Hotels a while ago. And I remember when I worked for Starwood and we were, redoing the brand decks, part of me was like, is this just like us all trying to justify the reason for having a job? Like, do we really need to be like redoing this again? And then recently I was looking at an old brand deck and it felt so out of date. It was perfect at the time, but it felt so out of date now. And I think everything that you just said is so crucial is how does it continue to evolve? The brand doesn't have to change, but the way that it's executed does.
And that's the responsibility of brand people. So there's a couple things to that. It's think about brand leaders as futurists. We have to be looking into the future. And you also can't be copying the playbook. You're not copying playbooks, but you need to be reading weak signals. What's happening in consumer behavior? What's happening with culture? What's happening in tech? And that way, if you're looking at yourself as a futurist, think about it as a crystal ball, right? And again, this is like science and intuition. Well, then you can be setting up your brand and try to skate with where the guest is eventually going. They don't even know, but you really have to think about what that is. I'll share a quick stat for you. And this is going to get into maybe a little bit about Regent hotels. So, and how we need to evolve. 76% of luxury consumers will be millennials and Gen Z. And the majority of those individuals, their wealth is earned and it's not inherited. It's very different of how you think about now, these luxury cues that were built on baby boomers, and it was all about inheritance for them. It's no longer the case. So then you start to think about, well, with that type of movement, some of these Gen Z, some of them may be a little bit younger, even younger, but you need to then start creating your brand and proof points around that. Someone that doesn't have an inheritance, but has earned every dime and they have made it, guess what? They're probably a little bit frugal despite their wealth, right? Don't nickel and dime them. Someone that has, built their wealth, what's really important is this proactive service. Their time is so, so precious for them because they poured their entire hearts and souls into building their empire. So you start to think about, all right, well, they're frugal despite how wealthy they are. They really need proactive service. So then you just start to rethink these brands, not changing the DNA, but making sure you're leaning into how culture is changing.
Yeah. And the consumer is actually changing. It's not the boomer who is making the booking decision and paying for it anymore. 76%. That's quite staggering even to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you just were talking about Regent. Let's talk a little bit more about the brands that you're looking after and tell us a bit about like what makes each of them different, what their unique selling points are. And let's kick off with Regent.
Yeah, okay. So here's a fun fact before I get into the brands. 10 years ago, IHG had one, obviously their luxury brand and their namesake, Intercontinental. And the last 10 years has been a very thoughtful strategy of really either through acquisition or building new brands from scratch of building out their luxury and lifestyle category. And it's super, super exciting. And so the first one, absolutely Regent, much more in that upper luxury brand. And it's, redefining modern luxury. It's about sparking these very fresh perspectives to help guests rise above that noise. Then you have Intercontinental, which has been shaping global travel for over 80 years. I would say a household name. And that brand is all about sharing their knowledge and their expertise to connect people to cultures everywhere because it is such a global brand. Kimpton, Kimpton needs no introduction. It was the pioneer of boutique space, very design forward, all about their restaurant and bars and very heartfelt service. Then you have Vignette. So Vignette's one of our newer brands. And, think about that as a collection brand. It gives independent-minded hotels the freedom to stay very true to themselves and while really benefiting from that global platform, the distribution engines, what have you. So a lot of room for that brand to be fiercely independent. And then lastly, we have Hotel Indigo. And Hotel Indigo, such a fun, sweet brand. It really celebrates the character of the world's most interesting neighborhoods. It's absolutely discovering a place through the lens of a local. And so these brands, really span, I think we have over 500 hotels. They hit, I think, over 70 countries. So really, a really nice, well-rounded, I think, portfolio, because ultimately what you want to also make sure we're doing is that, you have the right brand in the right place, but importantly for every type of trip and for every type of purpose to be able to serve a really wide range of guests.
We were speaking in the beginning about how wonderful this industry is with opportunities. And I know before we started recording, you were mentioning you're hiring for your team.
I am really, really exciting stuff. So I am hiring for a head of luxury and lifestyle brands for the Americas. And so that, is going to be a really exciting role over Regent, Six Senses, Kimpton, Intercontinental, and Vignette. And I think, Katie, we were talking about the importance of not just, a cookie cutter approach of taking what's happening globally and forcing it into the hotels. But this person is going to be saying, how do we regionalize this? How does it make sense to take, let's say, Regent, a brand that was born, in Asia, and actually bring it over to the US? And how do you regionalize that thoughtfully? So that's a really exciting role, which will be posted very soon to help lead these brands in the Americas.
That's an absolute dream job alert. So guys, get on it, go apply, send in your CV today. Speaking a bit more about Regent and also Kimpton, both of those are brands that were actually acquired by IHG. And we've obviously seen, and we continue to see, a ton of mergers, acquisitions in the industry. What are your thoughts on what can be seen as the big corporate companies scooping up the little brands?
Yeah, it's scary, right? It's a lot of pressure. I do think when it's done right, and the way that I think about it, because I'm in those shoes right now, right? It's all about stewardship. You have to really think about how you're protecting the soul of the brand. You have to think about what made the brand so special. You can't change it just for the sake of changing it or wanting to put your fingerprint. You should if it makes sense. But I think when you think about these acquisitions, it's about giving these brands the opportunity to scale and the resources to grow. And that's exactly how we think about Kimpton and Regent. Kimpton, for example, has always been guided by Bill Kimpton's belief. A hotel should always lift your spirits, never put you to sleep. That's our North Star. Our role, I think, as a larger company is not to change that, but give the brand more insights, more data, more resources to be able to grow it. Because I think, in fact, you can actually amplify the brand, obviously, as it grows. Same thing for Regent. It was all about being very, very intentional in how we grow that. We just opened Regent Santa Monica last year, and we have a few others in our under our belt, across the globe. But those are really good examples of brands that we don't want to water down that DNA, that it is important to think about stewarding these brands, these baby brands that come in, or brands that have been really established. And again, it's not for the sake of changing them to put that fingerprint on it. It's just being very thoughtful in what you do with it. And
I saw photos of Regent Santa Monica and it looks stunning. Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. And that one, it was a conversion. Lowe's, it was a Lowe's conversion, and the owner really was very, very thoughtful of, again, talk about also this entrepreneurism. He wanted to be the first to take the leap and to bring the Regent over to the US. And so a really fantastic partnership of what that debut meant.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of where taking a really specific brand of, you want to bring in that Asian heritage, the Asian roots, that's going to actually be a point of differentiation in a market like Santa Monica. How many hotels do you have that are, renting surfboards and being about the beach and like doing all the like things of the destination, which I'm sure that property is also doing in their own way. But that kind of Asian heritage that brand brings through is going to be special in a market that doesn't have many others like that.
Especially when it comes to service and the type of, obviously, very thoughtful type of service. When you go out to Asia, it's just so thoughtful in its execution and the personalization and what have you. But to also make it fit well in the market, you do have to sit back and say, all right, how do we give them the easy breezy vibes that you would get and expect from a hotel in California too?
Yeah. And I think the balance is, you never want anything to feel thematic or kitschy. How do you bring in the heritage without making it feel like, you're steering too much into a narrative, let's say.
Totally. Absolutely.
Scaling can be seen as a almost dirty word sometimes, though. And I know that is something that we just talked about, that the bigger companies are proficient at. And there's so many pros that we can talk about from that as well. But particularly in luxury, it's something that people seem to look down on sometimes. What's your take on that?
Scaling sometimes scaling is a dirty word. I love how you just express that. But I think it's also when people confuse scaling with sameness.
Mm.
And I think there is this fear that growth is ultimately or automatically going to mean that it is cookie cutter and that you're going to strip away that character and charm. So I think scaling, and if you do it thoughtfully, is going to amplify your brand, kind of what we just talked about it, and introduce it to consumers everywhere. But the piece around clarity is so, so important. So you have to be so precise and so clear in that vision and that story. So everyone in that ecosystem, as you scale from your GMs to your owners, to the frontline colleagues, they should be able to recite what that purpose is and what that vision is, because that's what gives the brand consistency. It's not the thousand, brand standards and what have you. Each property should express it in its own way. And I'll give you a quick example of it for Kimpton. We have a brand program that has been around for a really long time and people still love it. It's called the Kimpton Social Password. I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but ultimately it's this password that we publish through our platforms, through our social site. And if guests give that password at check-in, they get something. They get a little bit of a delight. Well, the way that that's going to be executed, let's say in Samui versus in Beverly Hills, is going to be different, right? In terms of what is then that surprise and delight that you're going to get.
But yet globally, there will be a password. And that is, I love that. I think that is such a great differentiation. And I don't know if it comes from decades ago where we had the kind of big box hotels that no matter if you were in Mumbai or New York, the room looked exactly the same. I don't know if we're still in that. I even found when we were living in the UK, a lot of the top restaurants were actually chain restaurants, places like the Ivy, for example. And I always wondered that. I'm like, well, why is it okay for there to be a chain over here, but still be perceived as one of the top restaurants? But in New York, it'd be like, oh my God, the second you have a second location, it all went to hell, right? So I think what you're talking about of being able to still be unique and still be of the destination, but then going back to the brand is really special.
Yeah, and it's really important. I hear you. I've had the same observations, and honestly, sometimes I feel like also European brands that come over to the US are a lot sexier, if you will, than sometimes the other way around. But
Yeah, or maybe it's grass is always greener. Maybe they feel that way and vice versa. Who knows?
it's great.
On a personal note, you travel almost every week, yet I know you are an extremely proud mama to 3 kiddos, a 6-year-old and 2 2-year-old twins, which, wow, you're amazing. How do you balance it all?
By knowing that there is no balance, I think. Look, in my early 30s, I was full throttle. I was a maniac. It was, I was building and I was designing and launching brands, and it was nonstop. I was always on a plane. There was absolutely no pause button. There was no kids. I was totally fueled by building and creating and what have you. Now, still building and I'm still traveling, but motherhood has definitely changed the lens of going full throttle. It's added this type of perspective that it's made me a lot more empathetic. I lead differently now because I know that so many people on my team are also juggling and navigating kind of the same pressures. I'll say this in how to do it. And this is hard for me because I am absolutely a recovering perfectionist and a recovering people pleaser. And so it does come down to trade-offs and to boundaries. And for me, it's easier said than done, but I have to be deliberate about where I spend that energy. And those trade-offs is, listen, I'm the stuff that I used to love, making every hotel opening event and the impromptu dinners in New York and being at every social thing, they're just not happening. right now for me. And that's okay. It's a chapter that I'm in. And so for me, it's, do the work that I love and then protect the small, simple moments with my girls and husband that actually fill my cup. And, the boundary side is between 5:30 p.m. and 8 p.m., it's totally family time. It's a ritual for me at, 5:30. I'm walking out of my home office. I'm picking up Mila from aftercare. I'm taking the twins with me. We're going to the park. We're going for a walk. It's not glamorous. It's so not glamorous compared to what life was like.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, totally. Of course, hello, especially in columns and PR.
I had Gail Simmons on the show, and I said to her, I picked up my daughter the other day, and she was having a full-on meltdown on the street, and I'm sweating and trying to get her to be quiet. And I thought to myself, Gail, does this ever happen to you? And she just looked at me and said, all the time. And I feel like children are just the great equalizer.
Aren't they? And they keep things in perspective. I think for adults, we probably need them more than they need us.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm really interested in what you said about how it's changed you as a leader, because I will never forget really early in my career. I was in my early 20s living in Manhattan, and I got a call that my mom was in the hospital. Something had happened with her heart. So I was, devastated, absolutely devastated. The first thing I did was grab my stuff and just head to the train so that I could get out to see her. And I remember messaging my boss at the time and telling her, this happened and I'm heading to the hospital. And the first thing she said to me was, well, who's going to do XYZ presentation today? And she lost all of my loyalty in that one question, literally all of it. And you can't come back from that, because in that moment, she showed me who she was. Whereas I had a colleague who was much more senior than I had also told her that I wouldn't be in, for at least a few hours or so. And her first response was extremely empathetic. And she wasn't someone that, I directly reported to or anything, but from her response in that moment, she gained my loyalty instantly. So I don't know if you've seen that with your team, but I imagine they have felt that.
Oh, absolutely. It's when you experience that, and when you heard your first boss, and there's a little bit of what? And you don't want to pour your heart and your soul into your work if you don't get the grace, versus your second experience where it was I feel supported and I feel loyal to you and I want to do more. I'll tell you really personal story that IHG took such incredible care for me. I was pregnant when I started with IHG, and they were so supportive. And yes, I was sprinting. I wanted obviously to build credibility and, obviously, but the way that they supported me when I did go on maternity leave, for someone that I was with the company for less than a year at that point. I couldn't wait to get back to work. I couldn't wait to thank the people that were supporting me and were championing me. And so it makes you a lot more invested when you do get more empathetic leaders on the other side, and vice versa. And I think, with my team dynamics right now, it's this mentality of we've got you, for someone on the team that maybe does have a sick kid that they need to pick up from school in the middle of the day. The response is, we've got you. And so it's, it's this really great support system and bond.
Yeah. Vicki, I want to ask you the last three questions that I ask every guest. And first one is, what was the best hospitality experience you've ever had?
Yeah, this one, obviously, it's a hard one, especially for people that are in hospitality, because we get so many wonderful experiences. But I'll give you a personal one. It was this summer. We took our first big family trip as a family of 5. So me, my husband, Mila, and the twins. And it was to Martha's Vineyard. Now, when I was living in DC, getting to Martha's Vineyard, it was a breeze, right? Direct flights. If you've ever done that trip from Chicago, oh my goodness, it's like a bit of an odyssey here. So you're taking a flight to Boston. There's a layover. Then there's a tiny 10-seat propeller plane. So we experienced delays. The kids were losing their minds, all of the chaos where my husband and I looked at one another and were like, what were we thinking?
Why? And you're
Why?
outnumbered.
Right? And then here's what happened. We landed. I got a text from an independent, there's really no chain hotels on the Vineyard. And it was from an independent hotel. And the text said something like, hey, we know that your flight is delayed and we know you have your hands full. We've already set up the pack and play and we've stocked snacks in your room. Katie, it brought tears to my eyes because I felt so seen and understood in that moment when I really, really needed support. So for me, that was just an incredible experience that also, I still talk about. And, obviously that's exactly what we strive for also with IHG. But I think in that moment, it was a service moment that was so geared and it was all about me and my family.
Yeah. And every parent listening will say the fact that not only the pack and play was in the room, but set up for you and then communicated so that you didn't have to be worrying and thinking, oh gosh, is it going to actually be there? That's gold.
Yeah.
Next question is, what was the worst hospitality experience you've ever had?
I'm not the first to say this. I'm gonna take the easy way out here. It's what is going on, obviously, with the airlines. It's killing me. I was on this happened a few years ago. I was on a long haul flight and it was one of those, to Bangkok, and I was in the final stretch, right? So I was in New York trying to get back to DC, go to get on my last leg of my flight, total mix up with my ticket. And at this point, by the way, I was not global services at the time, but I was 1K. I had a little bit of status. It was so transactional. There was absolutely no empathy, no sense of, oh my gosh, you've been traveling for at least 18 hours. There was no emotion into it. And it was just like, oh, this made me feel even more deflated. Yeah. Things are going to happen. Mix-ups are going to happen in hospitality, obviously, in travel, but it's about how you create opportunities to just build more loyalty, obviously, right? And actually talk about how they made it right.
Yeah.
Instead of what I'm saying here.
It costs nothing to be nice. And if they had just said that to you, like you said, just the acknowledgement that you had in Martha's Vineyard of, we understand how you must be feeling. I mean, you would have paid double the ADR, I imagine, versus this one's like, too bad, I'm gonna yell at you because you booked your ticket incorrectly or something, versus thinking about what you're going through in that moment.
Yeah.
And final question, what does hospitality mean to you? And is there anyone, maybe a person, a brand, that you think has truly mastered it?
Today, for me, hospitality, very much is about being seen and understood. And I think some of the examples that I gave today was exactly that. And that type of, I think, thread or that type of mindset for me personally, you heard me say it runs through my childhood. Obviously, my Greek roots, every role that I've had, or, being a leader, it's all about being seen and understood. So, I think as a brand leader, the ones they really think about, how do you, can you institutionalize that kind of humanity? But the ones that do and have that type of foresight, I think, are the ones that really show up every single day in the right way.
Vicki, this has been so inspiring. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. It's time for today's sweet summary, where I break down the key insights and actionable takeaways from today's conversation. What became clear in talking with Vicki is that she's an architect of possibility. Whether she's building global hotel brands or coaching individuals on her team, her approach blends structure with creativity. She knows that the best ideas rarely come from a single source. They come when people are given enough parameters to focus, but breathing room to explore. I enjoyed our discussion around the power of freedom within a framework. I noticed that come through in how she thinks about branding. providing cultural touch points and guardrails to properties while empowering GMs and their teams to bring that vision to life in a way that makes sense for their specific hotel in their specific destination. It was also evident in her behind-the-scenes stories of how Moxy was created. Sure, Marriott had standards, rules, processes, and systems that all existed for good reason. But they knew when to flex, adapt, and trust the team responsible for creating the brand with the latitude to shape it, even if that meant bold design choices like rocking chair beanbags. In both cases, the framework provides stability, while the freedom gives people the space to take risks and make the bold choices. I love how Vicki thinks about brands not as rigid rule books, but as living systems that evolve over time. The key, she said, is that they must always be anchored in a truth. She pointed to Nike as a perfect example. For 60 years, everything Nike has done has come back to one core idea: unlocking human potential. The expression changes, but the foundation never shifts. For Vicki, that anchor in hospitality and, quite frankly, life is simple but powerful. People want to be seen and understood. And when hotels get that right, it's unforgettable. Like the property she talked about on Martha's Vineyard that messaged her and set up the pack and play before her arrival. They weren't ticking a box or doing something just because she requested it. They put themselves in her shoes, understood what her day, her journey must have been like, and went out of their way to anticipate her needs. That small gesture meant everything to her. That's the essence of Vicki's message. A strong framework may keep a brand consistent, but it's the freedom within that allows hospitality teams to see their guests fully, anticipate their needs, and deliver the kind of human connection that defines true luxury. And that concludes another episode of Sweet Success. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. We all know how important those 5-star reviews are. I also want to say a massive thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in. It means the absolute world to me. And I'd love to hear from you. If you have ideas for future guests, new topics to cover, or even just want to say hi, don't be shy. Message me through our website, sweetsuccesspodcast.com, or on social media @sweetsuccesspodcast. That's sweet like hotel suite. Once again, I'm your host, Katie Cline, and I'm super excited to see you all next week.